last reader is Peter Eklund. He is reading an urban fantasy piece entitled Lumps of Coal, and his favorite holiday dessert is eggnog.
Measurements are a fundamentally human thing. When an animal chews food, it breaks it down into pieces small enough to incorporate into itself. When a human begins to divide tribes into persons, forests into trees, years into seasons, and stars into hydrogen fusion reactions, she is chewing the universe. Christopher's mother had big teeth. Her favorite division was to circle, in order of ascending size, her son, her house, her city, and her dignity, and snarl, "This is mine." There was a lot to snarl at. When he was very young, his father died. It was an impressive death, the kind that really requires a long, arcing narrative and an incredible amount of carpet cleaner. Naturally, he wasn't told the specifics of his father's life, and certainly not the vagaries. For as long as he could remember, he was simply alone in the house, left quietly to his own devices. Perhaps, at this point, it would be beneficial to formally introduce Christopher. Physically, he is slight, even bony, and although he will eventually ascend to a height just above average, he has not yet begun that climb, and remains rather small for his age. He wears the sweaters his mother gives him gladly, because he likes the extra bulk. Neither of these qualities distinguish him particularly. What people remember about him is his eyes. Young Christopher has a knack for finding the back of the room, the corner, the end of the hallway, and standing quietly while real life goes on in front of him. People swear at each other, hit each other, or hit on each other, and only then do they look down and see the eyes made big by wonder, and the perspective shifts of their mind as rubber bands snapped back to neutral gear, away from rage or lust and into the simple guilt of vocalizing either in front of a child. That's what they remember. December 24th was a night much like any other in a house that does not believe in belief. His mother tells him Christmas is a pagan holiday that Christians gradually wormed their way into, that covering a tree in gold and silver is a bribe to ask the tree to bring back the spring, that Santa Claus was very real, and that he should lie in bed all night without making a sound or he wouldn't get presents. Had he been older, he might have noticed some incongruity. Still, there was an iron to her words. She was using the tone of voice that she used on the days when she told him to hide in a cabinet while she stood by the door or the window with one hand white-knuckle grasping the big iron frying pan that seemed to be reserved for such occasions. Sometimes he thought he heard dull thuds, but in the dark enclosed space of the cupboard, his heartbeat and his thoughts became so loud as to sound like sounds, so it was impossible to tell. On that night, like every night, he lay awake, listening. His mother had forbade him, on pain of pain, to leave his room before the sun rose. Instead, he let his senses unfurl, used his ears to travel without moving. He followed his mother out the door to her night job, accompanied lonely cars as they whizzed down the street, tracked the footsteps of the upstairs neighbors as they stumbled drunkenly from room to room, and because the words of children echo ever on in the ears of children, out of pure hope he listened for the tinkling of silver bells. Gradually, the world went quiet. The cars stopped driving by. The upstairs neighbor finally collapsed. Even the wind seemed to have silenced, until it was so still that he could almost swear he heard the sound of individual snowflakes landing. There were a lot of snowflakes landing, too. Soon the far side of the street had vanished beyond the white curtain. Finally, when even the snowflakes had softened away to inaudibility, he heard them. The bells. The bells that had been dancing on the edge of consciousness finally stepped over the line, gliding with slow, graceful steps out of imagination and into his ears. First the tinkling silver bells, and then out of the bells rose the sound of hooves, lots of little clip-clops coming closer. Christopher shot out of bed, ran to the living room. There was no fireplace, of course not on the rent they were paying, but it was the idea that counted. Quickly he gathered wood, pencils, toys, his model airplane, crammed everything into the sink, found the stash of emergency matches, set it ablaze. The glue and paper of the airplane caught first and fiercely, and for a moment he began to have second thoughts and nearly turned on the faucet to try to douse the flames. But then the flare died down and the little bonfire spread evenly across his sacrificial toys. The bells and hooves drowned out whatever sound the fire might have made. Without quite understanding why, he began to mumble the names of the reindeer. Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen, Comet, Cupid, Donner, Blitzen, Dasher, Dancer, Vixen, Comet, Cupid, Donner, Blitzen, again and again, willing with all his might that the apparition from his window might really be real. Gradually, the little pyre grew taller and taller until finally it was as large as a man, and then as large as a doorway, and then the man stepped through the doorway. St. Nicholas stood on the edge of the counter, his long white beard made red by the firelight. He hopped down and shrugged off his thick leather pelt, set it down with a thump next to the fire to warm and dry. Christopher boggled at the mythical figure with his rosy red cheeks and his shiny black eyes like magic 8-balls. His little black boots clicked neatly on the tile floor. The saint smiled, revealing an abundance of alabaster dentistry, crinkling his cheeks like yesterday's newspaper. He set down his enormous brown burlap sack and reached into the folds of his coat, extracted a golden cube with impossible intricate interwoven mechanisms, 2 sapphires inset into the sides. "Would you like this, Christopher?" the giant asked. The boy nodded. "This is a puzzle box. If you can find its secret, it becomes a butterfly, a real one, that flies around the room. Here, try." Christopher eagerly took the box from his outstretched hand, frantically manipulated levers and switches and toggled toggles until, true to his word, the sides of the box unfurled into beautifully outstretched wings, and the mechanical creature took flight, its inset gems catching the light of the gradually spreading fire. Christopher watched it arc up towards the ceiling, and his eyes were so locked on it that he did not see or care about the incoming hand, didn't have time to resist as he was forced bodily into the bag which was not full of toys, but only coal. The soot invaded his eyes and lungs, and he coughed as he sank deeper and deeper into the endless landscape of coal somehow contained within that sack. He would have asked why if he could breathe, but it occurred to him that he'd set the kitchen on fire, disobeyed his mother, and let a stranger into the house, which were certainly not good deeds. Bad children, after all, didn't get toys, they got the other thing. Despair washed over him, and he curled into a ball and started to cry, the tears mixing with the soot to make a cakey grime that enveloped him until the gentle shaking of his sobs was the only thing distinguishing his supine form from those of any other black lumps. He wondered if they were children too. Suddenly, one sound cut through the silence. Pong! The sack shook, and again the sound. Pong! He could hear raised voices muffled through the thick fabric and endless coal. The argument went on for some time, punctuated by the occasional pong. Finally, a hand reached in, grabbed him by the scruff of his neck, dragged him out into the light in the face of his mother, her spare hand white-knuckle grasping the big iron frying pan. Behind her, a battered St. Nicholas lunged, and she spun and swung, the cold iron of the pan hissing and scorching the fat man's flesh. He stumbled back, regained his balance, thick, meaty jowls quivering with rage and indignation. Christopher's mother set her feet wide apart, gripped his shoulder firmly, and snarled, "This is mine."